All right, everybody, welcome back to Chapter 2. And Chapter 2 is on greenhouse gases. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Obviously, be solution-oriented. And, of course, you know a lot about this already. So we're going to look at some different angles of it as well. So are humans partially responsible for climate change or global warming? And yes or no. And then we'll talk about this during our class meeting. Look at how cute that polar bear is, but don't worry. He drowned a long time ago, so he's not suffering or swimming anymore. Ooh, I know. Sorry, but he did. And that's just the reality of climate change. All right. Chairman of the Environment Committee, Senator James Inhofe of Oklahoma, Republican, is an enthusiastic denier of climate change, saying it's the biggest hoax perpetrated against mankind, or personkind, if you're being gender respectful. The hoax is that there are some people so arrogant to think that they're so powerful they can change the climate, he said. Man can't change the climate. I think that this is an argument that we've heard before. But in reality, and in scientific reality, we know very much so we can change the climate and cause a great deal of catastrophe and frustrating problems in regards to the environment. Now, of course, there are also folks who are Democrats who are slow to the game on climate change as well. And if we really want to parse that out, and we will throughout the course of the semester, we can look again, like I said, on voting records and what the general trend is per party and how that is received and what that means for the environment and what that means over the past however many years, all the positive things, the things that are negative, and the things in between. All right. Which term are you more inclined to listen to or react positively towards? Global warming or climate change, and why? And we'll talk about this. So, again, we got to ask questions. So, that's what I want us to do really at the beginning of every question or every chapter, because that's going to lead us to solutions. So, as sociologists, ask questions and then ask some questions and then ask some more, right? So, what are the problems we're experiencing globally in regards to the environment? How did these problems manifest? Who are these issues impacting and how? And what are the solutions to these problems? Now, then let's get more specific. You know, what are the problems that are challenges that are facing us specifically with greenhouse gases or in regards to greenhouse gases and on down the line, you know, looking for solutions. We can continue to ask questions. And of course, we get more and more and more specific once we look and study a topic. So, climate change, a change in climate patterns due to human activity. Just some formal definitions, basic stuff that'll be on the exam, but I also think is important. Anthropogenic. So when people talk about climate change, can humans have an effect, or what kind of effect, or what does that mean, or what's the term for that? That's anthropogenic. So human-induced climate change. Can humans have such an impact on such a huge natural world? The answer is yes, absolutely. Like, no question about it. We know that. And of course, now we move on to what can we do with that. All right, so we know that we have a lot of challenges in regards to greenhouse gases. Let's just get some basics here. Any gas trapped in the atmosphere that absorb and emit radiation within the thermal infrared range. So scientific debate, right, is coming to a close. That doesn't mean that political debate, media-driven debates, continue. They are there. They're largely as a distraction to the issues already at hand. And the question is, or for what we're trying to wrap our heads around, how do we get past that? And then on to what can we do about climate change? If there's going to be a debate about it, let's debate what are we going to do about it. I mean, honestly, and with all amount of seriousness and no sort of snark involved, it's ridiculous that we're not all on the same page, particularly in the political realms. Those are the realms where we're going to see a lot of that change manifest. If it's going to manifest, we need to stop debating those issues largely to the profit and for the profit of companies that kind of specialize in harming by their by the byproduct or as a byproduct of their industry. So what are we going to do about climate change? Do we all bear an equal responsibility for it? Now, I've already been getting you to sort of think about it in terms of, who's the most responsible? Why? How do we determine that? Although my students always show an overwhelming capacity to take responsibility for what's going on with the environment, even if all of you, for all the semesters that I've ever taught, take all of that responsibility, we're still going to be miles and miles and miles from even getting to a starting point on this, because we really need it to be on a macro level as well as on a micro level, which students are doing great on. Our families are doing better than most countries, and certainly more mindful than most corporations. So what might account for the differing views between the public and climate scientists? Why is it so hard for us to change course, particularly in the United States culture? I mean, European culture, has shown a tremendous capacity to be able to change and adapt and understand and accept and then move forward with plans for climate change. We're still like way back in the baby steps are, can't we just agree this is happening? Now, of course, there are other countries like Russia who are not going to put a huge stake in that at all. But do we really want to be on that end of the spectrum? I doubt it, because first and foremost, we're a democracy. So what can we do? Why is it so hard for our culture, and particularly to change course? And what that makes that even more dicey, or at least important for us to address, is the fact that we do have so much bearing on industry. And we are such a big country with so much affluence worldwide. And oftentimes what the United States does when it's showing leadership, other countries will do as well. So why? And it's not now, it's not just during the Obama administration or this administration or even the Bush administration. Like, why has it really been getting more and more and more polarized politically when we are still talking about the very same things, and that's a base amount of survival? So good things for us to think about as we sort of approach this whole thing. All right. So real basically, global warming, a portion of the sun's shortwave radiation does enter our atmosphere, obviously, and it's absorbed by Earth's surfaces. It's transformed into long-wave radiation there in the form of heat, re-radiated back into space. Now, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says, obviously, global warming is certainly here. Very high confidence that human activities have contributed to it. What that means is, and this is from several years ago, a 9 in 10 chance with the IPCC. It's, we're at 98, 100%. We're there. That human activities contribute and are contributing to climate change and global warming. Now, the biggest culprit, right? Fossil fuels. The release of carbon dioxide, CO2 from the burning of fossil fuels, leading to what we know or have coined the term as the greenhouse effect. All world economies, and this is, again, why we have to look at this from multifacets, really do revolve around, and I have our economies are dependent on it, or maybe we're addicted to that. That might be heavy-handed. So we'll just say that our economies rely and policy revolves around fossil fuels as a primary factor. So, I mean, where do fossil fuel addiction, policy, and need, and then also, way over on the other side that we hardly talk about, which is what's good for the environment, where do we intersect with that, and what can we do about that? We know it's getting hotter and hotter and hotter. 9 of the last 10 years are the hottest on record, and that continues to be the case. Even if we were to tweak our temperature half a degree, it has massive ramifications. I mean, half a degree, and suddenly polio comes back, and you've got all sorts of other things living or that are able to breed and live and reproduce and cause trouble for human beings that couldn't otherwise. You also have, obviously, water levels rising as well, which is another part of that. So what do you think? Basic question here in Chapter 2. Should schools teach children about climate change? Now, I've been volunteering for years and years and years over at Olander and Werner Elementary, and I go into the kindergartners, and I do a really cool unit on trees. But it's awesome because I didn't set this unit up. The teachers at these schools set it up. And it's just a change from when you were little and when I was little and what we see of as the use for a tree, and then how we start and how that starts to change with our perception, our worldview as we get older and what we see it for, right? When I ask my adults or my adult students and other adults that are older than them, what do we use trees for? A lot of the answers, right? Wood and burning for heat and building and lumber. And when you ask a group of kindergarteners, they're like shade and something and someone to play with and a place for my friends and right, and shelter, but without cutting it down. And so it's really remarkable because we, of course, need to continue to pay attention about how we see and view and interact with our natural world and how that changes. And in some ways, it can change and be even more positive as we get older. And in some ways, it gets less positive and connected as we get older. So anyway, should schools teach children about climate change? And then we'll discuss that a little bit. Here's a great link to a news piece about the Oklahoma earthquakes and the massive amounts of percentages. I think they're up 300+%, and yearly that keeps going up and up, and their relationship to hydraulic fracking. U.S. geological surveys have now done enough studies to attribute much of that directly to these injection sites, wastewater sites, and fracking sites, which we are no stranger to here in Colorado, as they have really continued to go along unabated for quite some time. And, we'll talk about hydraulic fracking, fracturing, and different issues that revolve around it later this semester. All right, let's get everybody on track here. Is climate change occurring? Yes or no? I really don't think, though, that picture is real, but fake news. You never know, right? All right, let's talk about the homers, all of us, right? What is the U.S. public, or what is our knowledge of climate change? So the Yale Project on Climate Change Communication really does identify, and I'm going to have you make some sociological observations here, because I think this is really interesting. So what they find is that there are just massive widespread gaps in knowledge and huge amounts of misconception in regard to climate change. So part of that is due to political affiliation. Part of that is due to where are you getting your news? And as the news used to be much and much less polarized and politically affiliated, that was a piece where, you would look at that as far as like across the board. Now, perhaps some news outlets really do reflect a political leaning, and of course they do. So where you get your news from and your facts from, your sources from, whether you're going to school or not, whether you're learning this in a scientific way or sort of just in a rudimentary, just sort of talking amongst friends and fans or family, members, this is kind of what yields that. 63% of Americans believe climate change is occurring. 66 understand how greenhouse gases trap heat. Well, okay. 50% understand global warming is caused mostly by human activities. 45 understand CO2 traps heat from the Earth's surface. 75 would like to know more, because, if somebody asks you that, you want to sound like, you want to know more. And you're all about learning. And 75% say schools should teach about climate change. Maybe we'll talk about this slide when we get into it this week, because I think you can make some huge observations. There's some confusing things, and then we can connect some dots. All right. Atmospheric levels of greenhouse gases are rising, as well as rates of increase. Now, when we have an unabated rate of increase and our levels are also unabated, that poses some pretty unique challenges for us as human beings. Since 2000, the annual rate of increase has increased at 2%. Since 2000, it's now 3%, and it is more, or about to be more, as we're on the cusp of having CO2 emissions double every 25 years at this rate. We cannot have that and survive. Present levels of CO2 have never been higher in the past 420,000 years. No, we can't go back millions and millions. Yes, we know it's cyclical, but when you can go back almost 500,000 years and do ice core samples and measure CO2, we have plenty of data to look at, to know where we're at in as far as this time and place in history. We emit more than 20 billion tons of CO2. Now, if we look at natural emissions, 776 billion, that's fine, but absorbing more than they emit, not enough then when we look at that to be able to offset human beings, okay? More than 89% of the trapped gases goes into warming the oceans. And when we talk about the ice caps and the polar ice melting, we have to understand that, again, this isn't an issue that conservatives or liberals can ignore, like, oh, it's melting, it's going to raise the sea levels. It's not. The point is, we're losing billions of gallons of fresh water that, and I think absolutely politically, absolutely in every way we can all agree, if it's going to go, it shouldn't go right into turning into salt water. We need to be able to use it somehow and could come up with some ideas which would be really, really important for us. So we know that these rates are increasing. And we know that the impacts here are tremendous, right? Ecological disruptions, coral reef diebacks. They're trying to plant back as much as they can, but we're losing them super fast. Wildfires. I mean, I'll just sip something here like Kermit. That's none of my business, but our whole state is on fire, right? And much of California, and that's impacting not the states around us, but the entire country. Species extinction, we're in the sixth greatest or largest extinction. And a lot of times we think that that's not our problem, but it is. I mean, drinking water shortages, heat waves, drought stress, disease, damaging storms, obviously agricultural conditions, changing soil conditions. And again, you can't keep raising the temperature. You won't be able to grow food outside. Plants need to live, and they can't simultaneously be dying and super heat stressed and actually do what they're supposed to do. So increased disasters. I'm not going to say natural anymore. That is a term that we sort of pinned on Mother Nature or on nature. We won't genderize nature. And rising disease and health problems globally. So we know that. The most threatened are the least responsible. Again, when I ask, are you doing your share? Should everybody's share be equal? This is when we're talking about our CO2 levels and who's driving that up, right? 19.7 of the world population. But look at how much of the world's CO2 we account for. And again, folks that we sort of the usual suspects that we like to lay blame on who are not very responsible for that. 80.3 of the world's population is down here, right? And they're not very responsible for creating much CO2 emissions at all. Yet we sort of look at it as if those numbers would be equal or we should all share the same responsibility. All right. We'll end with this question. Do affluent nations have responsibility to help the rest of the world adapt to climate change, considering they bear a significant and disproportionate share of the blame? People have answered this in all sorts of different ways, yes or no, and there are great answers for both of these ideas, but really then we want to get to the why. All right, that's it for Chapter 2, Episode 1. Be good people and do good things. Wear your mask, take care of each other on campus, and I will see you next time. Oh, he got rickrolled? Never gonna let you down. Never gonna